What is the most likely effect of a contractionary monetary policy at the same time as an expansionary fiscal policy? We've got A, both aggregate demand and interest rates increase, both aggregate demand and interest rates decrease, or aggregate demand increases while interest rates decrease. So we were looking at aggregate demand and interest rates in all three of these. Aggregate demand is going to relate to fiscal policy, and interest rates are going to relate to monetary policy. So if we have expansionary fiscal policy, that's going to lead to increased aggregate demand because there's going to be more spending, whether that's from the fiscal side of the government spending or whether they're cutting taxes and we're expecting consumers to spend more. So we've got aggregate demand increasing, so we can rule out B. So we have aggregate demand increases here and increases here. So between A and C, what's going to happen to interest rates under contractionary monetary policy? Under contractionary monetary policy, the Fed is likely increasing rates or doing something else to decrease the money supply. And so interest rates are going to be more likely to increase. Answer A. Currently, the USD pound spot rate is 1.6736, while the 3-month USD pound forward rate is 1.6745. Which of the following is the best interpretation of the forward discount premium? The interest rates in the United States are higher than those in Great Britain. The real value of the USD pound spot rate will appreciate in the next 90 days. Or C, the interest rates in Great Britain are higher than those in the United States. So let's pull in our formula to look at this. So we're looking at forward rate equals spot rate, and then we're multiplying that by these two interest rates to get our interest rate differential. So we have forward rate of 1.6745 and spot rate of 1.6736. So since this number is higher than this number, X is going to be our interest rate differential. So X is this whole variable here. So it's US rate over pound rate. So X is going to be 1.0005. So what this means is USD rates are going to be slightly higher than pound rates. And this interest rate differential is essentially why there ends up being this forward premium. And so we can conclude interest rates in the United States are higher than those in Great Britain. Answer A. In which of the following steps should an analyst most likely ensure that a financial statement analysis complies with code and standards? So we've got A, collecting input data, B, stating the purpose and context of the analysis, or C, developing and communicating conclusions and recommendations. So all three of these are going to be important to ensure that we're doing good financial statement analysis. But the key here is around C, developing and communicating those conclusions and recommendations. When we are sending information out to clients, that's when things get really important with complying with the code. We want to make sure that we're not communicating anything that's misleading or communicating anything that is intentionally misleading as well, or is incorrect or bad information. So for that reason, we're going to go with answer C. This is going to be the most important step. Which of the following valuation methods is least likely used under IFRS accounting standards? Is it A, weighted average, B, LIFO, or C, FIFO? This one's going to be pretty straightforward. Least likely, meaning can't be used. That's going to be B, LIFO, which is not allowed under IFRS. Weighted average or FIFO are good, but LIFO is not. Answer B. Galactic Hyper is a chain of hypermarkets that sells most of its products for cash, which is why its days of outstanding sales are as low as 22 days. Assuming that the firm's average receivables are $234,000, and the cost of goods sold for the 1-year period is $1.245 million, the annual sales of Galactic are closest to. So this COGS number is not going to be relevant for calculating this annual sales number. What we are going to need are average receivables and days of sales outstanding. Let's pull in that formula. We're going to take 365, divide it by this 22 days, and then multiply by 234,000. That's going to give us our annual sales of $3,882,000. Answer A. Which of the following accounting treatments will most likely result in a deferred tax asset? So we're going to end up with a deferred tax asset when we're paying more tax now than we need to, and then we're going to have some benefit later on in the future where we'll use that tax to offset future tax. So we've got A, revenue is recognized in the tax return for taxable income before it is recognized in the income statement. So this will likely be our answer. If we're recognizing revenue in our tax return before the income statement, that means we're going to be paying more money now on our tax return, which is going to be consistent with creating a deferred tax asset, paying more now, and then having that asset to offset future taxes when this is actually recognized in the income statement. So let's make sure we can rule out the others. Revenue is recognized in the income statement before the tax return. So this is going to be the opposite of A, so that will be incorrect. And C, expensive or tax deductible charges are recognized for tax purposes before they are deducted from the income statement. If we're deducting more from our taxes now, then we're going to have to pay them later when this flows through to the income statement. That's going to create a deferred tax liability, not a deferred tax asset. Answer A. Argon Pharma Limited reported a net income of $450,000 USD for the year ended June 30, 2017. The outstanding shares of common stock and convertible preferred shares are 40,000 and 10,000 respectively. And there are no other potentially dilutive securities. Each preferred share pays a dividend of USD 16 per share, and each is convertible into 2 shares of common stock. What was the reported diluted EPS of the company? So one word that is very important here is the reported diluted EPS. When we're asked for reported diluted EPS, that's going to include 2 calculations. We have to calculate our basic EPS and our diluted EPS. And if diluted EPS is higher than basic, then our reported is going to be our basic EPS. If this didn't ask for reported, then all we would have to do is calculate the diluted, and this would be our answer. But we're going to be going with B here because we got basic EPS under this. So let's walk through the actual calculation. So net income minus preferred dividends. So we've got net income of $450,000, preferred dividends of, we get 16 per share, and we have 10,000 shares. So that's going to be how we calculated this 160. And then weighted average number of shares outstanding, we have 40,000 of common stock, and then there's nothing else on things changing. So then the key difference is here. Under diluted EPS, we're getting rid of the preferred dividends because these preferred dividends are getting converted. So we're normally not having to pay out those dividends anymore. But now we have 10,000 shares, and they're each convertible into 2 shares of common stock. So the 60,000, we're adding 20,000 to the 40 to get that 60. So this calculation ends up as 450 over 60,000 gives us 7.5. And again, because we are using reported, we're going to have to report that basic EPS. And essentially what this does is it just incentivizes firms not to dilute their shares just to boost their earnings per share numbers. Answer B, which of the following is most appropriate statement regarding financial assets? A, available for sale securities are reported on the balance sheet at their amortized cost. This is going to be incorrect. They are held at fair market value if they're available for sale, not amortized cost. Rule out A. B, held to maturity assets are stocks acquired with the intent of holding them to maturity. Stocks do not mature, so this is going to be an incorrect answer as well. And C, trading securities are debt and equity securities acquired with the intent of selling them within a short period of time. That is going to be correct. And we'll go with answer C. The table below contains information that was extracted from the financial statements of XYZ company. Use the information to determine the effective tax rate of the company for the year 2015. So we have 2015 numbers and 2014. It looks like we're only going to be looking at 2015, so we can ignore all this. And we have some information here. So we've got income before taxes, tax payable, deferred tax assets, and deferred tax liabilities. So we're going to be using all of this to calculate our effective tax rate, which is going to be income tax expense divided by pre-tax income. So pre-tax income given at $88,000. We need to do some additional calculating to get our full-on expense. So our income tax expense is going to be equal to tax payable, which is $10,500. And then we're going to add to that change in deferred tax liability minus change in deferred tax asset. And okay, I actually made an error here. We are going to be using these numbers here. So let me get rid of that big X off of there. So we're going to be looking at 2014 numbers to determine the change in the assets. So our change in DTL is going to be this portion right here. So we had 35,000 in 2015, and that used to be 25,000. So that's going to be a positive addition of 10,000 that we're going to have to add to our income tax expense. And then for deferred tax assets, we're subtracting the difference between these two. So 65 minus 50, that's going to be 15,000. So our income tax expense for this year ends up at 5,500, which we'll divide by 88,000, gives us a effective tax rate of 6.25%. Answer A. The financial data of unilateral equipment for the year 2014 is provided in the following table. So we've got net income, depreciation, decrease in accounts receivable, and we'll read the rest after we get into the question. Assuming a tax rate of 40% for the firm, the free cash flow to equity for the year 2014 is closest to. So we're going to be calculating, let's bring in our free cash flow to equity formula. So we're going to be looking at, for free cash flow to equity, starting with net income, we're going to add back non-cash charges. So we'll start with the 700 million. Add back non-cash, which is going to be things like depreciation. Then we're going to subtract out changes in working capital. Changes in working capital are going to be these decrease in accounts receivable. The increase in inventory is also going to be accounted for. And then we're going to subtract out CapEx and add in net borrowing. CapEx is given at 180. So that'll be straightforward, and net borrowing, we'll just have to net out these two. So changes in working capital, put a little note here. So decrease in accounts receivable means that we received more cash, therefore we're going to be adding that back. So this decrease of 49 is going to be added in here as we see. An increase in inventory means that cash went out to buy that inventory, therefore we're going to subtract from our free cash flow to equity. So 36 is going to be subtracted, which is given here. We have positive CapEx, which is also cash that went out. So we're subtracting 180 there. And then for our net borrowing, we issued 450,000. Or 450 million. So we get that 450 million in, but we repaid 330. So that's money that goes out. So this is going to be a net positive of 120. When we add all these and subtract all these out, we get 710 for our free cash flow to equity. Answer B.